In 1979, two young girls had a chilling encounter at Huntington Beach with a man who seemed off. Shortly after, one of the girls vanished, and just 12 days later, only her skull was discovered. The police sketch of the suspect was widely circulated through newspapers, and it wasn't long before a detective recognized him, appearing on television as a contestant on the dating game, kissing another unsuspecting victim. No one could have predicted the magnitude of his crimes. Rodney Alcala, the charming contestant, would later be revealed as a serial criminal suspected of taking the lives of 130 people. His reign of terror could have been cut short if it weren't for a terrifying secret, hidden by one young girl who would later reemerge to bring him down. In 1965, 13 years before the infamous dating game episode, 13-year-old Morgan Rowan and her family had just moved to North Hollywood. The shy girl was attending Catholic school and enjoying the sunny, free-spirited vibe of California. On one fateful night, she and a friend decided to hang out at their favorite spot, the Hullabaloo Club, a well-known nightclub often frequented by celebrities. As they waited outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the bands arriving, Morgan noticed two older guys staring and smiling at them. Her friend excitedly pointed one of them out. "That's Rod," she said. He was tall, charming, and had a magnetic personality that drew people to him. Girls couldn't resist his charisma, and he seemed to enjoy the attention. Rod kept glancing over, flashing smiles and playful winks until he finally waved them over. After chatting for a while, Morgan's friend left to meet someone else, leaving her alone with Rod and his friend. Despite the situation, Morgan found Rod intriguing and welcomed the extra attention. He pulled her close, hugged her, and laughed as if they were old friends. But what Morgan perceived as flirting masked something far more sinister. Without warning, Rod grabbed her arm and dragged her into a dark alley behind the club. Morgan felt a sharp blow to her head, causing her to lose consciousness. When she awoke, Morgan found herself pinned against the wall with a dumpster shoved against her. She was badly beaten, and Rod had vanished. Somehow, she managed to free herself and frantically pounded on the club's door. The owner's wife came to her aid, but the encounter left Morgan traumatized. From that point on, she did everything she could to avoid Rod, never telling anyone about the assault. For 3 years, Morgan stayed out of Rod's way. Her fear and trauma lingered, but eventually, she started going out with her friends again. In August 1968, just days before her family was set to move back to New York, Morgan decided to spend one last night out on the Sunset Strip with her friends. The streets were alive with people singing, dancing, and socializing. But amidst the fun, Morgan spotted Rod in the crowd. A chill ran down her spine, but she chose to ignore him and enjoy her final night. An hour later, her friends invited her to grab a bite at IHOP. They piled into a car, with Morgan sitting between her friends Mike and Evie. Out of nowhere, Rod climbed into the driver's seat and sped off. Terrified, Morgan kept quiet, unsure if she should run or act like nothing had happened. At the restaurant, Rod mostly ignored her. When she passed a payphone on her way to the bathroom, she considered calling her dad for help. He had always taped a dime inside her shoes for emergencies. But Morgan decided against it, convincing herself that she didn't want to ruin her last few days with her friends. Rod later insisted on driving everyone back but made a sudden detour to a house, inviting them to a party. While her friends were excited, Morgan was uneasy. Loud music and people talking filled the house, but she couldn't shake her anxiety. Eventually, Rod cornered her, grabbed her, and threw her into a bedroom, trapping her inside. In a sudden act of violence, he punched her, rendering her nearly unconscious. He then pulled out a kitchen utensil and cut her clothes, leaving her vulnerable and terrified. Though her friends banged on the door, trying to find her, the loud music drowned out any sound from inside the room. Somehow, Morgan mustered the strength to escape. Shattered glass from a nearby window provided her an opportunity, and she ran into the streets, barely clothed and bleeding. Mike, one of her friends, caught up with her, urging her to report the incident. But Morgan refused. The thought of telling her fragile mother was unbearable. Instead, she went to Mike's house to recover, keeping the secret buried deep within her. Weeks later, after moving to New York, Morgan received a letter from one of her friends from that night. Enclosed was a newspaper clipping. Rod had been arrested for assaulting and nearly ending the life of an 8-year-old girl. Morgan was overwhelmed with guilt. She blamed herself for not stopping him earlier. She scoured newspapers, trying to find out if the young girl had survived, but found no answers. The Rod she knew was now a ghost haunting her dreams. Years passed before Rod resurfaced in Morgan's life. In 1971, 3 years after attacking her, 2 girls in New Hampshire walked into a post office and saw his face on the FBI's most wanted list. Known to them as John Berger, their former summer camp counselor, the man on the poster was Rodney Alcala. He had been working at a camp for teenage girls, likely plotting his next crime. On August 12, 1971, Detective Steve Hoddle felt triumphant. After picking Rodney Alcala up and flying him back, he believed the case was finally closed. With Alcala in custody, facing charges of kidnapping, assault, and attempted unaliving, Hoddle expected him to be locked away for decades, bringing peace to the streets. But what seemed like a clear-cut case soon unraveled in a shocking turn of events. Despite physical evidence, eyewitness accounts, and the victim's identification, the prosecution's case hit a critical snag. One key witness was unavailable. The 8-year-old girl at the heart of the case was unable to testify, leaving the prosecutors with no choice but to offer a plea deal. Alcala accepted, pleading guilty to a lesser charge of child endangerment. And in a stunning move, the judge sentenced him to a term of 1 year to life, meaning Alcala could be released at any point after just 1 year. In 1974, after only 34 months behind bars, Rodney Alcala was released. His charm and manipulative skills had convinced the parole board that he was rehabilitated. However, the world had yet to witness the true extent of Alcala's terrifying nature. Fast forward to June 20th, 1979. 5 years after his release, Alcala approaches 12-year-old Robin Samso and her friend Bridget while they're having fun at Huntington Beach. Introducing himself as a photographer, he offers to take their pictures, a tactic he often used to lure young girls. As he begins snapping photos, a concerned neighbor approaches the girls, asking if everything is okay. Sensing suspicion, Alcala swiftly flees the scene. Shortly after, Robin leaves her friend to attend her ballet class. Bridget lends her a bike to help her get there on time. An hour later, Robin's mother receives a call from the ballet studio. Her daughter never showed up. Panic ensues, and Robin's mother, Marianne, reaches out to Bridget, discovering the unsettling encounter with the mysterious photographer. The police are immediately notified, and Bridget works with a sketch artist to create a composite image of the man who approached them. The sketch is quickly circulated across local media, but Robin is nowhere to be found. 12 days later, on July 2, 1979, Robin's body is tragically discovered in the foothills of Sierra Madre, miles from where she was last seen. The devastating news shatters her mother, Marianne, who struggles to comprehend her daughter's fate. As investigators work around the clock to find the life-taker, a breakthrough comes when Detective Jenkins receives a tip from a parole officer who notices a striking resemblance between the composite sketch and a parolee under his supervision, Rodney Alcala. Detective Jenkins, exhausted from long work hours, decides to look into Alcala the next morning. But as fate would have it, that evening, while relaxing at home, Jenkins stumbles upon a rerun of the dating game. To his horror, there on his screen is Rodney Alcala, introduced as Bachelor Number 1. Charming and full of confidence, Alcala flirts with the contestant, Cheryl Bradshaw, winning the game and securing a date. Jenkins can hardly believe his eyes. Robin Samso's suspected life-taker is on national television. In a terrifying twist of fate, Cheryl Bradshaw instinctively feels something is off with Alcala after the show. She confides in the producer, saying she cannot go on the date because Alcala gives her creepy vibes. This gut feeling might have saved her life, as Alcala was later revealed to have been involved in multiple assaults and unalivings. On July 24, 1979, police arrested Rodney Alcala for Robin Samso's life-taking. Despite his attempts to hide in plain sight, living just steps away from where Robin's body was found. Authorities obtained a search warrant for In February 1980, Rodney Alcala went to trial. The courtroom was packed, every seat occupied. Robin's mother, Marianne, attended, sitting just behind the man accused of taking her daughter's life. Unbeknownst to anyone, Marianne carried a fire weapon in her purse, her hand gripping it as she sat there. Overcome by grief and anger, she was ready to fire Alcala herself, believing it was the only way to bring justice for her daughter. However, at that critical moment, she felt Robin's presence, smelled her daughter's shampoo, and heard her voice telling her not to go through with it. Marianne couldn't bring herself to take the shot. On April 30th, 1980, the jury returned its verdict. Rodney Alcala was found guilty of Robin Samso's life-taking and was sentenced to death. For Robin's family, it was a small consolation. Though it couldn't bring Robin back, they hoped it would save others from falling victim to the same monster. But in a stunning and painful twist, Alcala's death sentence was overturned just 4 years later. In 1984, the California State Supreme Court ruled that he had not received a fair trial, throwing the family back into the nightmare they thought had ended. For the Samso family, it was a never-ending cycle of pain. Each time Alcala's sentence was overturned or retried, they were forced to relive the trauma of losing Robin. Years passed, and in 2001, Alcala's death penalty was overturned yet again. However, by that time, advances in forensic science were catching up to him. In 2003, Matt Murphy, the district attorney, decided to reanalyze the evidence, focusing on the pouch of jewelry found in Alcala's storage unit. Using new DNA techniques, they linked Alcala to a string of unsolved murders from years prior. Alcala's DNA matched the profiles in 4 cases from Los Angeles, including the life-taking of Jill Barkholm, Georgia Wickstead, Charlotte Lamb, and Jill Parento, all between 1977 and 1979. Further investigation tied Alcala to the life-taking of Cornelia Crilly and Ellen Hover in New York. 4 of these life-taking occurred before his appearance on The Dating Game, exposing the extent of Alcala's crimes and confirming what many had long suspected. Alcala was a prolific serial criminal. In 2010, after nearly a decade of legal battles and overturned convictions, Rodney Alcala stood trial for the 3rd time. This time, the charges not only included Robin Samso's life-taking but also those of the 5 other women. However, the most shocking moment of the trial came when a witness took the stand, a woman whose testimony would stun the courtroom. It was Tali Shapiro, the 8-year-old girl who had survived Alcala's harm in 1968. For the first time, Tali shared her story publicly. She recounted how, on a warm morning in 1968, she had reluctantly accepted a ride from Alcala on her way to school. Unaware of the danger, she entered his home, and everything after that was a blur. She was attacked and left for dead, but thanks to the swift actions of 2 good Samaritans, a bystander, and a police officer, Tali survived the near-fatal assault. Officer Chris Camacho's decision to remove the bar from her neck saved her life. Tali's testimony moved everyone in the courtroom, especially Morgan, another survivor of Alcala's predatory behavior. Tali's bravery inspired Morgan, who had long blamed herself for not coming forward earlier. Overcome with guilt for years, she had believed that if she had acted sooner, she might have prevented Alcala from harming others. After the trial, Morgan finally reached out to Tali, seeking forgiveness. To her relief, Tali did not hold her responsible, telling Morgan that she was not to blame. This moment of forgiveness marked a turning point in Morgan's emotional healing. On March 9, 2010, the jury returned its final verdict. Rodney Alcala was found guilty of 5 counts of life-taking and was sentenced to death once again. After 30 years of legal battles, the families of the victims could finally feel a small sense of justice. Alcala's crimes had torn lives apart, but the courage of survivors like Tali Shapiro and the perseverance of the victims' families ensured that the truth would eventually come to light. Even after his conviction, the full extent of Rodney Alcala's atrocities continues to be uncovered. In 2015, police released 120 photographs found in Alcala's locker, hoping to identify more potential victims. Among those who saw the photos was Kathy Thornton, who recognized her sister Christine, who had disappeared 39 years earlier. Finally, Kathy found closure, knowing what had happened to her sister. Rodney Alcala, the so-called dating game life-taker, died in prison in 2021 while awaiting execution. Though he spent his final years behind bars, the scars he left on countless families and survivors remain. But for those like Robin Samso, whose short life became a catalyst for justice, their legacy endures as a reminder that evil can never truly own those it touches. Rodney Alcala's sinister charm masked a lifetime of horror and pain, leaving scars that will never fully heal. His actions tore apart families and forever changed the lives of his victims. But even in the face of such darkness, there is always light. The bravery of survivors like Tali Shapiro and the relentless pursuit of justice by families like Robin Samso's ensure that these stories will never be forgotten. Remember to stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and never hesitate to reach out for help if something feels wrong. Evil thrives in silence, but with courage and action, we can all play a part in preventing these tragedies from happening again. Thank you for watching, and if you found this story important, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more true crime stories that seek justice for the victims. Stay safe, everyone.